Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.
Hello everyone, I'm Guan Yu, a PhD student based in Sheffield, a podcast volunteer at SpeechPitch, and a member of the UKSpeech 2023 local committee. This year, we received 104 submissions from 32 affiliations. Apart from the big speech research groups in Cambridge, Edinburgh, and Sheffield, there are also many other research groups of various sizes. What does it like to conduct speech research without a big team? How to connect with a wider research community? Today, we have Zoe from the University of York. Let's have a chat and see what she says. Hello, Zoe.
Hi.
Welcome to the UKSpeech 2023. Is it your first time visiting Sheffield?
It's not my first time visiting Sheffield, so my partner did his PhD here and my brother just lives up the road from the conference venue.
So you know Sheffield quite well then?
Yeah, reasonably well, yeah.
Would you say the recent weather, it is the best of the Sheffield?
It's definitely the best I can remember, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, especially for a hilly city like Sheffield, when the weather is no good, it's a little bit difficult.
I wasn't looking forward to walking up the hill this morning, to be honest. Yesterday I took a bus, but today I wasn't looking forward to it.
Is it too hot?
Just because it's quite a long way up the hill. It was a little warm as I got halfway up, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So in a few words, can you introduce yourself and tell us what your research is about?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Zoe Handley. I'm an associate professor at the University of York. There I work in the education department and specifically in the area of language education. In language education, it's a group that focuses on applied linguistics. Myself, my area of interest is the application of technology to language learning and teaching. So the idea is to try to harness the affordances of technology to facilitate language learning and teaching and also to engage learners in language learning in the first place.
That sounds super interesting because we have a lot of researchers doing speech technologies and your focus is more on the application side.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I've been really pleased to see here at the conference. Really great to have that first talk from Kate Neal that kind of brought me up to speed. So I actually first looked at speech technology. That's what I did in my PhD. But that was back in the early 2000s. And speech technology has obviously come on a long way since then.
Yeah, I imagine the use of speech technologies in language education was quite different back then.
So what I think's interesting back then is there's some what I would call kind of seminal works from back then that talked about how to work within the limitations of the technology. Sort of the idea that you can basically changing the persona of the character you're interacting with. So it's a bit forgetful to account for the fact that the speech recognizer might not, it would have had a higher error rate back then. And other ideas there were that technology wasn't good enough for real natural conversational interaction. But what you could do is you could constrain the task, make the task as narrow as possible. So even though it's kind of a branching system in the background, to the learner it appears like they're having a naturalistic conversation.
I see. But with the development of the speech technologies nowadays, do you feel there are less limit of applying it in language education?
It appears to me that there are, and certainly you're starting to see coming onto the market. So in the sort of around 2000 was the time that you first saw the use of speech recognition for evaluating learners' speech. So for doing assessments, they weren't using it for IELTS then, but for doing some form of language assessment, so assessing the proficiency of learners. Now that technology is starting to be more deployed. You see it in systems for formative assessment, so for where it's kind of assessment for learning, it's more like a mock or practice and giving feedback. And I can see that the different assessment providers, whether that's the ETS and the TOEFL or IELTS, they're investing more heavily in both the speech technology and the NLP to do these automated speech and automated writing evaluations. And you can see those coming onto the market, and you can also see that the research is starting to happen about whether this technology can be used to move from monologic interactions to dialogic, so conversational, which is much more realistic and authentic of what learners need to be proficient in doing if they go on to study for a degree or to work in a particular environment.
Nice, yeah. So the use scenarios are broadened, and also not only the teacher or the assessor benefit from the speech technologies, but what's more important is the learners, right?
Yeah.
So they can benefit by using the technologies on more frequent basis.
Yeah, and you can see that also the technology. So I went to the British Educational Technology Trade Fair recently, and there I was seeing that the technology was not just being used to give an overall holistic evaluation, but starting to be used for more diagnostic evaluations where you were providing learners analytic ratings, so not just overall proficiency, but fluency, accuracy, grammar. So, for example, there's a company called SpeechPitch that was doing that and showing how their kind of ratings aligned with IELTS, TOEFL, etc.
All those information are very helpful, especially for a learner. I think instead of just knowing how well they can perform in a target language, they would like to know what areas they can improve. Right?
Absolutely. And so one of my PhD students is working on self-assessment, and what we're hoping to do in a follow-up study, whether it's for a PhD or a separate project that we do, to actually look at using, for example, SpeechAce's technology or something like the ELSA system to see if that supports learners and is better than sort of self-assessment.
Yeah, very interesting. I very much look forward to hearing you talking more about that. But today we are at the UKSpeech, so I'm wondering, have you encountered any interesting ideas here? What kind of ideas?
Generally for me, as someone who's not core to the community. So I'm not a speech recognition. I don't develop speech recognition or speech synthesis systems, though I did work at Toshiba shortly on their dictionaries. For me, it was useful to update myself. So particularly the first talk, to understand how the current state of the art and how these systems were being built. Because even though I'm not building them, I'm looking at their applications and evaluation. I think that sort of thing can only really be effective and done well if you have a certain level of understanding of the underlying technology. So it's been really helpful to understand that. I've also been to some interesting posters on, again, diagnosis, thinking about whether you can provide feedback on pronunciation at a very fine-grained level. So not just thinking about phoneme substitutions, but what is the feature that's different here and not like the native target? So that was really interesting. Really interesting to see about lip sync, because I think that could be something that could be employed in developing immersive language learning sort of platforms or simulations. I was also really interested in anything about bias. Because obviously from the assessment perspective, so I'm dropping into the posters where they're talking about bias, how you how you measure that, but also how you can mitigate it as well. Obviously this is kind of to a certain extent an emerging field, but just finding out, where are we at with that has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's very inspiring, because you talk about understanding the underpinning principles behind those applications, and which can help you use those applications with more, sensible judgment.
Absolutely. I think so, more broadly speaking, there's lots of hype and hysteria about AI.
Yeah.
A lot of that is because people don't really understand the underlying technology. And I think if you're going to apply technologies to a particular real world problem, having at least a conceptual understanding, I don't understand layers and things like that, but having a conceptual understanding about how the systems are built, and what they're trying to do can help you to better understand how to deploy them, and also what you need to do when evaluating them as well.
That's lovely. So talking back to the research, so you talk about you don't do speech technology research yourself. So what is your experience of doing speech research like?
So in terms of doing speech research, originally my PhD was on text-to-speech synthesis in language learning. So there I was looking at it from a user's perspective, or someone who's going to deploy this. So I was evaluating the technology. Since then, I've also worked on high variability pronunciation training. So not using speech technology, but using natural voices. So high variability pronunciation training being one of the techniques which has been shown to be effective. And the other thing I've done more recently that I managed to kind of bring back to speech technology was I was looking at, so one of the outcome measures we look at in general language learning research, so for example, task-based language learning, we report complexity, accuracy, and fluency. And there's a lot of talk in these papers about fluency and sort of suggestions of what it tells us about learners' underpinning proficiency, but that's not backed up by research evidence. And so the link to the conference is that there's a link here that automatic speech evaluation systems are also primarily and have always been based on fluency measures. And so the piece of work that I'm presenting in my own poster is looking at what do these fluencies, these many, many different fluency measures, what do they tell us about underpinning proficiency? Or so my work looks at, basically I've taken measures of their breadth of lexical knowledge, their lexical processing, their grammar knowledge, and their morphosyntactic and syntactic processing, and then looked at how do these relate to fluency. So to allow us to understand what do these fluency measures tell us, and also link that up to an overall judgment of proficiency, and looked at how they all relate to one another.
Yeah, very well structured. I think what I get from your is that when we judge a learner's proficiency, for example, from the perspective of fluency, there are many other elements related to fluency. So we need better understanding of those factors.
Essentially, what my work's trying to do is say, when we talk about fluency, you can look at it from a number of different perspectives. You can look at the actual speech stream, so what we call utterance fluency, but you can also look at perceived fluency as well. What does a native speaker perceive? To what extent do they perceive the speaker to be fluent? But you can also look at cognitive fluency. So this is the question of the extent to which the processes that underpin speech production, the extent to which they're working automatically. And so my work's trying to put together that understanding of the underpinning processes, so lexical processing and syntactic and morphosyntactic processing, and asking to what extent are they related to that utterance fluency, the extent to which our speech is at an appropriate pace, the extent to which we pause or hesitate or repeat ourselves.
Nice, yeah. Can I ask, do you do all this research analysis and experiment on your own?
So I have done a lot of that on my own. So the group that I work in, the Applied Linguistics group, spans people who are interested in psycholinguistics and do that from a neuroscience perspective, to people who are working in language learning classrooms and are interested in conversational interaction. And I lie somewhere in the middle. In terms of understanding cognitive processes underpinning speech processing, some of my colleagues have expertise I can draw on there. When it comes to fluency, it's about me interacting with the linguistics department, where there are colleagues who work on speech recognition and phonetics. But also I regularly meet on Zoom with a colleague at Leeds who is interested in exactly the same questions as myself, or variants on the questions about what is fluency, What does it tell us about learners' proficiency? And how do we support learners to develop their oral fluency as well?
Yeah, so all these researchers are not only from University of York, where you work, they also come from somewhere outside the University of York. How did you identify these potential collaborators?
So they're from conferences like this, and I should say the reason I'm here is actually because I would like to identify collaborators who people I could work with to develop language learning applications. So applications which kind of draw together the speech recognition technology, the speech synthesis technology, perhaps added in some adaptive learning to develop systems to support learners to acquire a foreign language. So this is really me getting myself up to speed with the state of the art and thinking about what technology is out there and who is there who might be interested in collaborating with me to build those kinds of systems. I'm also was attracted to UKSpeech because I have been once before, a very long time ago, and I remember that it's a conference that attracts industry partners as well. And one of the things that I wanted to do as well was to use it as an opportunity to find out who those industry partners might be and to start talking to them as well.
Nice. So you have a very clear goal of attending the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's
Nice.
less about presenting my work, more about the networking.
Yeah, that's definitely a very important part of having conferences, isn't it?
Yeah.
So apart from attending UKSpeech, do you feel you have enough opportunities to connect and collaborate with other researchers?
It's something that's really challenging, I think. So myself, I'm on a teaching and research contract. So actually teaching takes up a lot of my time, and that makes it quite difficult to reach out to people, even within my own institution. I think what's been really beneficial for me, the pandemic has actually been really beneficial because what it's done is it's meant that there are more online events. So I can attend talks that happen all over the world. I've presented at conferences in other parts of the world, and I tune into talks all over the world. And that's helpful because obviously funding is often quite restricted for travel, but also from my perspective, as someone with a young child, it just makes it more feasible to get out there, to find out what the current state of the art is, and to start talking to different people.
Yeah. Now we are back into the in-person conference.
We are, but certainly, so in the field of applied linguistics, one of the things we're running a conference as well, is we're going to live stream some of it. And also one of the special interest groups, I'm really keen that we have like a regular webinar series, because I think conferences are great for meeting a lot of people, but actually you want to meet kind of the same group of people regularly if you can. So if you could have like a regular webinar where people with a common interest come together, I think that could be really good for the community as well.
Nice. Yeah. So trying to adapt to suit the different needs of the participants.
And it's more accessible to a wide range of people as well.
Nice. So in your opinion, what could research community do to help you achieve what you want?
So for me, I think what's a real challenge is bridging the gap between STEM and the social sciences. So if you look at UKRI strategy, you'll see that it notes that the UK is at the forefront of AI, and speech technology fits within that. But it is less good at translating those technologies into real-world applications. To do so effectively requires interdisciplinary collaborations. So collaborations with linguists, collaborations with people in psychology and education. And if you look at for example, the work on speech recognition for language learning, you can still see that there's a lot of work on the underpinning technology, but less so on actually building the applications, the real world applications, and testing them. And so what could be helpful, I'm not quite sure what is needed. Certainly the funding schemes are going in the direction that they're going to be more open to interdisciplinary collaboration. So there's a cross-research council funding that's been recently announced. And I think that could be supportive. But there are also the infrastructures and the willingness and the skills that are needed to be able to collaborate across the different disciplines as well.
Yes, I totally agree. Maybe some framework and some opportunities to do a project together with people from different sides and develop a repeatable approach, then that may make things different.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is, what the barrier is. There can be, for example, institutional barriers. I've worked in interdisciplinary institutes before, and while we were supposed to be an interdisciplinary institute, it was really difficult sometimes to get access to resources in other departments. So there could be institutional barriers. There can be barriers as well in terms of, so what for you in the speech tech field is cutting edge and is referable research, is different to what's referable research for us. So in education, we might not be looking to do as cutting edge work in speech. We might want to use the robust technology from a few years ago, and that might not feel beneficial to colleagues because it's not going to lead to, for example, referable work. And so there's questions about how can you work together to be able to create these real world applications. I think the introduction of RSEs, so research software engineers at institutions, that might fill this gap, that ability for a project to perhaps be driven by researchers working in an application domain such as education, to collaborate then with other disciplines, but with research software engineers doing the work, because that's not cutting edge and referable for those in the sort of the sciences and the STEM area.
So trying to have a project that suitable for each individual researcher's interest.
Yeah, and it's like what's in it for each of the different collaborating researchers. And unfortunately, we're all trying to get referable publications. I mean, that said, I think there's something in it for those in sort of STEM areas who are developing the underpinning technology to be working with those in education or other application areas like health, to be working together, because that can allow them to demonstrate the impacts of their research, so the real world impact. And we need to develop stories about that as well for things like the Research Excellence Framework.
Yes, I think it's not only short-term impact. Some researchers, like yesterday the keynote speak talk about the Irish language development, that requires a long-term efforts and experiment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zoe, for taking the interview.
Well, thank you for offering me the opportunity to talk.
I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.